Fundraising Forward, a podcast on how to get the most out of your fundraising while building a stronger team.
I'll introduce Robb Pike, Skip Leonard. Skip Leonard is the Vice President and Chief Development Officer at INTEGRIS Foundation with INTEGRIS Health. Skip has a diverse background in fundraising, development of philanthropic strategies, board development, investment coordination, and volunteer management. His roles include successful assignments at University of Illinois Health, Lee Health in Florida, and Dartmouth Hitchcock Health. INTEGRIS Health is the largest Oklahoma-owned non-for-profit health system, operating more than 1,800 licensed beds in 18 hospitals. INTEGRIS Health Foundation is a designated 501c3 with its own board of directors. The foundation serves as the philanthropic arm of the INTEGRIS Health system and raises charitable support for services, initiatives, and capital needs across the system. So welcome, Skip. Did I miss anything on that one?
No, you make me sound like I have this breadth of experience in philanthropy, and compared to some, I'm a relative newcomer to it. But no, you caught it good.
No, I'm actually glad you said that, because I think in terms of relative newcomer, how long have you been in philanthropy, and what brought you to this?
So I've actually been in philanthropy since late 1999 or so. I think that I spent several years on Capitol Hill, and I was staff director for a committee for Congress. And one day my boss came to me and he said, the chairman of the committee came to me and said, listen, I'm not running again, and I've just been offered the job of president of a university at that point called a college in Rhode Island. I'm a Rhode Islander originally. And he said, I want you to come up and be my development guy. And I remember looking at him and said, Ron, you don't want me in child development. That's just not my thing. He goes, no. I don't think it has anything to do with child development. I think it has to do with fundraising and alumni and stuff. And I think at that point in one's life, as I was, much younger and newly married and all those things, I think that there was a quality of life piece and component to that difference than being on Capitol Hill in Washington, and decided to kind of take the step with my wife, and back to Rhode Island we went to start. So I actually have as long a history in being chief philanthropy officer or vice president or head of the development alumni office in universities as well. So I was head of philanthropy for Furman University, for Clarkson University, Dartmouth Hitchcock. I also oversaw philanthropy for the Geisel School of Medicine, which is part of Dartmouth College. It's one of those matrix kind of healthcare organizations. And but I kind of fell into It's Not Fair. I think it was a conscious decision to do something that I thought was really interesting. I'd raised money politically, but when you raise money politically, you raise it for an individual. You're not necessarily raising it for a cause or impact. And once I got into it, it catches you. There's no question about it. I think that it's a wonderful profession for people to go into. I think it's changing significantly. When I started, it was an art. There's no question about it. Metrics and accountability were kind of pushed aside, and now that has changed dramatically. And now it's the kind of the combination of art and science. And I think that it's just a wonderful field. I feel very blessed and fortunate to be in it and to continue in it, and would highly recommend it for anybody who wishes to kind of really be involved and impact.
And I think to that, you've got the unique perspective of having worked in both the healthcare philanthropy setting as well as higher education.
Yeah. And also, the political one. The political one's interesting to me. We'll dive into this second. What's the difference between political fundraising then? And because a lot of people will come into this, I've done political fundraising. Yeah. Why shouldn't I be able to do non-political fundraising?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with, as I said earlier, raising money for an individual. Yeah. So when you're in political fundraising, you're normally raising money for the candidate or for the re-election of the candidate or something along those lines. And that's not all what political fundraising is about, but it's a big part of it. So it's very different when you're raising money for a person because you are that person's personality, its background, and all those things matter. And that may or may not be aligned with the good they're going to do. As we know, it doesn't necessarily mean just because you're in politics, you're going to do good things. Yeah. But it feels very selfish. There's no question when you're raising money for an individual, it feels selfish, And after a while, it's happen. It's what the political machine runs on. But when I moved into higher ed, with a stint in private school education, I was head of philanthropy, head of development for St. Paul's School, which is a pretty well-known school. You're raising money for something kind of larger than yourself, larger than an individual, and I think that it became that grabs you. That absolutely grabs you. And I didn't do a lot of political fundraising. I did it more as kind of on the side, but it wasn't that fulfilling. Working in professional philanthropy was very fulfilling, and I think that it gives you politics and Capitol Hill gave me a great understanding of different views, different roles, understanding what it means to disagree and to how to work with compromise, how to work with jointly, how to collaborations, and I think that I wouldn't have given that up for anything, because I think that really steads me as I think about, and especially in healthcare. Our committee was the first committee to have the first go around of what we called at that point Hillary Care, which was single payer healthcare systems that Hillary Clinton led for her husband, the president. Yeah. And I remember hearings and not understanding politics and policy and all those and the intersection of the two. And I just loved healthcare policy and what happened.
So I would think that, this is where I don't have a background in political fundraising. I mean, I understand the higher education. I understand some of the more cause-based charities. I understand healthcare philanthropy. But within political fundraising, you have a person running on a platform and a message to make an impact in a particular precinct, in a particular state, an area. And the messaging has got to be so, the case that you're building has to be so attractive to get people to want to invest in politics. Where you're going to see the difference in terms of the person wins or not. If they don't win, it's not to say that you're not still interested in a particular cause, but you're taking a chance. Yeah. When I'm investing in a university or college, it may be that I'm an alumni there. It may be that I like the type of research and development they're doing, or even in healthcare, I like that I have an attachment to the organization. So I would think that the political fundraising has got to be such a huge challenge, but the messaging, the experience of what it teaches you and how to develop a good message of the why, like why you should be a part of this cause is
it is different. And remember, political fundraising, though, there are very specific laws against certain types of fundraising, and you can only raise a certain amount from an individual and so forth. And it's quite low compared to what we deal with in higher ed and even in healthcare. But you're still fundraising for the individual and for the character of the individual. Most people, I'm not saying today's world, but most people back then really voted for the person. Their platform was important, but the person really mattered. And I think that as I moved into the messaging of the larger organization, the messaging of impact, the messaging of these organizations, the person was probably 10th in line. There were certain professors, certain doctors, certain things that mattered, but it really was the organization that mattered and what people were giving to and the way you responded to them. So it's certainly a lot easier than political fundraising as far as really getting into it and really diving into it. But once it grabs you, it's tough to let it go.
It is a drug of sorts.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
You really love helping people.
That's right. That's right.
So that experience in terms of your higher ed and healthcare, where do you see the differences and the similarities in those two industries in terms of the need, obviously, and conveying the need?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think you've heard me say this before, and I've said it at conferences before, that higher ed, in higher ed, you have donors. Donors are normally those, that sometimes 80% of them, are those who had a great experience, for the most part, between the ages of 17 and 21. Yep. Now, some go to graduate school, and those are included too, but for the most part, it's between the ages of 17 and 21. And they're giving back to what they remember, what they felt, what they think. Trust me, if they didn't have a good experience between 17 and 21, I don't care how wealthy they are, you're going to have to work really hard to get them engaged in giving back, even how great the institution may be now. So they're donors. Please give to us. You get a letter, you get a message, you get a visit, whatever it is, but you're still kept at arm's length, with the exception we want you to come back for alumni reunion because you're alumni. Healthcare, we don't want alumni. We don't want, I've been to your hospital 100 times. I love coming back to it.
Yeah.
It's just not
my favorite place in the summer.
Exactly,
Right.
That's
exactly.
not, no.
We don't have a football team. So, it's a very different experience because what folks are giving to is impact. What they're giving to is their potential experience, but we have many donors who have never had a significant experience at our health system. But they're giving to impact to the community, impact to things that really matter. At Clarkson, we were in the middle of I think it was a $400 million campaign. I may have the numbers a little off. Very substantial at that time. And we were raising a significant amount for NCAA sports issues, whether scholarships or new arena or whatever it was. And it was always amazing to me how people would give to that. Now, it had great impact on the quality of hockey or football or whatever that we were raising money for. But there wasn't a great impact on the community. As a matter of fact, the community was kind of very much on the outside. In healthcare, when you raise money, you're raising it for the health of the community.
Yeah.
It used to be for the healthcare of the community, healthcare being reactive, health being proactive.
Yep.
That's shifted now because of payment models and new thinking within health. Health now is the prime driver. We want to invest in the health of the community, and we want folks to give to us to invest in the health of the community. That's really very exciting. It's something you don't see in higher ed. That's the primary difference. And what that shift is that we've become, our donors aren't donors anymore. They're investors. They're philanthropic investors.
I like that.
We don't want to leave them at a distance. As a matter of fact, as investors, especially at higher levels, they want to be under the curtain with you. They want to see, hear, feel what impact means. And you can't just do it through a letter or through, kind of a major gift officer coming to visit you, once a year, whatever it is. They want to be there with you. And that's we struggle, even healthcare, we still struggle with the old model, the old donor model. It's not what folks if someone gives me $10 million, or in one case, $289 million to healthcare.
Wow.
They're not giving it because of some great experience they had.
Yeah, it's not the T-shirt.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
It's not the T-shirt.
Yeah.
That's right. It's about impact to what they want to do that's greater than themselves. That's really exciting.
There's two times. I'm going to go deep for a second here around just the word investor. Some people bring that up in philanthropy, and there's it's fear. Like, why would I do investors? They ask different questions, everything else. How have you transitioned to that? Because you talk about it as a power. Like, I believe these people are investors. How did you get to that place?
We're still transitioning. I mean, make no doubt. I think we need partners like AHP and others to help us understand what our relationship is with a donor and what our relationship is with an investor. A donor, as I said, we keep at distance, and we send you letters, and we tell you how wonderful you are. An investor, they're with us. And oftentimes that makes us feel uncomfortable. So that relationship has to shift. Yeah. And the old school thinking, quite frankly, in healthcare philanthropy, and there's some that do it really well, in healthcare philanthropy, they're still under a higher ed model. You have moves management, you have donors, all those things. But it brings us to about here when we need to be way up here. And when we start treating our donors now as philanthropic investors, all of a sudden they'll call you up. Well, how's my new program doing? Or how's this doing? Or how's that doing? Can I come in? Absolutely. Matter of fact, if they have to call us up and say, can I come in? We're not doing our job.
Yeah. How do you feel that leadership involvement in healthcare versus higher education differs? And I'm wondering that because of the model that higher education has that I think healthcare is attracted to is that it seems to be more of an organizational culture than just a departmental culture. Yeah. It's the foundation does that. Yeah. But I'm curious what you see.
There's no doubt that in higher ed, leadership, philanthropy drives higher ed. It is at the table. It is at the top of the table because the alumni normally drive the strategic design.
That's why you're on the board.
Right. You're on the board. You're on whatever it is. That's right. Drives that strategic design of a higher ed organization. Healthcare CEOs and leadership in healthcare, and this is not true of all, because there are some that are really good at it and are very successful at it. And they tend to be the best healthcare and health organizations in the country. It's amazing. The two do go together. But they tend to put it aside. This is not what I got in this for. No one told me I had to do this. I'm much more concerned with net patient revenue. I'm more concerned with pop health and some of the risk issues. I'm more concerned about value than I am about philanthropy. But the fact is, philanthropy can invest in each one of those strategic pillars that drive healthcare systems. And we're not there yet because we're still in that old college model. But once we begin to move there, all of a sudden, healthcare philanthropy, which normally has not been at the table, starts to move into the table. We're now aligned with the things that keep the CEO up, that keep the CMO up, that keeps the COO and CFO up. Because right now, we're not quite aligned with that. And until we get aligned with risk strategies and investing in risk, until we get aligned with new ways of healthcare delivery that we're seeing, and being able to have the foundation or the development office invest in those, and have our donors and now our investors who really are savvy. Folks who give to healthcare organizations are very, very savvy. They're not giving out of kind of, well, because I had a great experience between 17 and 21. They're not giving for those reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
They're giving.
It was a great 4 years with
That's
it.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. These are very savvy investors who want to understand what investing in a population health strategy means, that understand what innovation and
The economic impact of health in the
absolutely.
community.
That's huge within it. We talk about health and healthcare. The impact that INTEGRIS, which is the largest employer in the state of Oregon, not just the largest healthcare employer, its economic impact is absolutely huge.
Yep.
That should be one of our strategies of how do we, number one, communicate that, but number two, how do we reflect that back to let folks know that what drives INTEGRIS healthcare also drives the economic viability of the state. It's very, it's
So
stuff.
it's something interesting is that when we talk to donors about investing in the organization, one of the things that is really important is being able to say thank you and to be able to steward that relationship to explain how the dollars were spent, because that's what's going to help going forward to raise more dollars. What I've heard you say actually was an interesting take, which is that you're actually helping to find solutions for management, for leadership, to help them sleep at night. And you're helping the foundation to provide solutions for them so that there is the same comparison to the donor, which is I'm showing you how the dollars are being spent to raise more dollars. I'm showing you how I can help ease some of the risk and concerns you have so that you can participate in this more because it's a win-win for both sides. And the reason I say that is that I think within the higher education fundraising environment, everybody's on board with they know the cause. They're teaching, they're seeing the sports, they're seeing it all. They see the impact right away, and so they can all be a part of it. In healthcare, they're so concentrated on the clinical side of the house and the outcomes there. Just sometimes the fundraising can come second, and often I've seen where the foundation has to almost justify its existence in a nonprofit healthcare arena, not just to the healthcare team. Like while we're here, we're not just here for events, but we're here because we can provide solutions that impact the community and can impact the organization. So I love where you're going with that in terms of ways in which the foundation provides.
Yeah, if you would cast some vision for me, right? So when we first got into healthcare fundraising, we're funding for these things, right? Patient care. Now, cast vision, like in the future, these are the things that big system should be actually helping to do.
So let me lay out that question, and I'm still learning. So I'm not the brightest guy in the world, but I'm still learning. And which is always a clear vision of leadership. The best leaders know what they don't know. And that's a learned trait with a lot of gray hair and a lot of mistakes. But what? I was at I think I was at Dartmouth and Dartmouth Hitchcock, and I went down to visit a donor. I was going to ask this donor, I think, for $10 million. We were in the silent phase of a very large campaign for Dartmouth and Dartmouth Hitchcock. And so I went down to visit him, and he was a large real estate developer, gone through some tough times. We were coming out of the Great Recession. And went down and said, I'd like you to consider, $10 million. And he said, yeah, that's kind of where I'm thinking. And he's telling me about his his development. I said, what about the idea of having Dartmouth and Dartmouth Hitchcock in your new, very large development as concierge medicine? Because we had a lot of folks coming from the Northeast, and we had a lot of folks that had significant healthcare needs being in our population. He goes, tell me more about that. And so, and all of a sudden, we were switching our relationship. He gave us $10 million. Sure. We were switching our relationship to an investor relationship.
Yes.
He wanted us, and we wanted him to invest in creating a concierge service that would be branded Dartmouth Hitchcock down in his very large high-end development. And it had to do with telehealth and telemetrics and virtual health, moving from telehealth to virtual health. And that was clicked on me because I said, we're missing an opportunity. Not only are we talking to him about, kind of typical $10 million, not typical, but philanthropy, but now he was beginning to talk about how we might invest, and he will invest as a collaborative joint venture in bringing this. That started the whole thinking. So we began to move. If you look at foundations, you start out, and I'm doing this right now, with a structure, and I'm calling it restructure. Looking at the things we need to change in the structure and so forth. And that's kind of center of the box. We're now moving into redesign, where we're looking for reinvestment, and we're laying out metrics, and we're laying out things that are going to help us drive what success looks like for us. Forward-looking, not where were we compared to last year kind of metrics. That we got down. We know that one by heart. It's the forward-looking ones. What does our world look like 6, 8, 12 months from now? And the third piece is kind of to your question. It's reimagining healthcare philanthropy as a driver for diversifying revenue, as a chassis to diversify revenue for the healthcare systems you support. And that's really exciting because we deal with and have interactions and relationships with very wealthy, many of whom are venture donors, are venture investors. And they're really interested in hearing more about that. What does that mean? Lee Health, we created Evolution Health Ventures, which was a subsidiary of the foundation and of Lee Health. The whole idea was to be able to do some really innovative things that a healthcare system can't do because they kind of lose their true north. At least they feel that way when they do this. But the idea was how we can use philanthropy and the foundation to drive diversifying revenues for the health system, whether it's joint ventures, whether it's collaborations, whether it's real estate ventures, whether it's IP, royalties, the whole 9 yards, that there's a place that can set in here that reverts back to the mothership, reverts back to the main organization. But it also drives their true north. So when we started investing in pediatric behavioral health, we invested $2 million in an app that was being developed by one of the large pediatric behavioral health companies in the country. It was amazing. We used an iPhone app. And we ended up selling that company for $8 million. Our $2 million made quite a tidy sum. But it wasn't because it was something that was way out. This was important to Lee Health, pediatric behavioral health. So it had a real true north purpose, yet it was something very different than typical philanthropy.
It's I'm just reflecting upon when we see groups or work with groups. The idea, I'm hearing so much transactional money dynamics. It's important people don't forget, you're only doing this to actually bring better health in the community. You're just finding the best widgets to do it. Sometimes that's direct philanthropy. Sometimes that's, let's look at partnering together and building something together. Sometimes that's invest in our startup. The nuance here is, and I think this is where I'm going back to the word investor. Who do you have to bring along so they're ready to do that? Because most people hear the word investor and they think it's not going to be a pleasant dialogue.
It's a negative thing.
It's a negative thing, right? Well, you're going to start asking me hard questions. Well, are your best relationships at the highest levels based on hard questions?
Absolutely.
And that's the transition to investor.
Absolutely.
Because now you're going big and saying, well, why shouldn't we put the money there? Let's really talk about it.
I'm asking you for $10 million. That's a very serious conversation. If I'm asking you for $10 million for philanthropy or as a joint venture. That's almost identical conversation. Now, there's some tax ramifications in the difference, but it's almost the exact conversation with the return piece being the one you have to have the right people in the room to help you through that. But the return piece being the differentiation. Because one's a dollar return and one's an impact community return. But both impact the community. Both have the same positive true north value that we look for in healthcare every day. Well, why can't healthcare systems earn diversifying revenue on those possibilities?
And I'm going to ask you to take a little bit of a leap on this one, but why do you think that the traditional donor development model is so attractive to so many healthcare organizations? When I hear you speak about this, it's investors. Investors translates to a little bit of risk. In that it's a win-win. I want to be able to invest because I want to be able to see an outcome and impact. But a partner as well. I want to have a partner in the community. How do you mitigate how do you communicate the risk to get people to jump on board with these types of innovative ideas where others may be hesitant to go? But I think what you said is it's more to what impact can we have on the community. We're talking about moving health care forward.
Yeah, I'm curious on that point. Like, who actually is the person that's holding back the most from moving forward? Is it external or internal?
I think that's a great question.
I think it's absolutely both. I think internally, organizations, healthcare organizations tend to be very risk averse and very organizationally centered. That is what matters most. Yeah. I think we're now moving to patient-centered, but oftentimes it has been historically organizationally centered. What matters to the health of the organization? So you have that challenge in front of you automatically. The conversation, good conversation, $5 million donor gave us $5 million that we just opened up a new children's hospital, $250 million children's hospital. He gave the children $5 million unrestricted. Mm-hmm. That's extraordinary. Even to unrestricted in healthcare is just. And so I said to him, "This is so great." And he goes, "I'll give you $10 million if you tell me about this pediatric behavioral health app, and I like to invest in it." There's not a lot of those donors out there, and there's not a lot of those investor types out there, but they are out there. And all of a sudden, a foundation who's willing to expand and willing to understand, and an organization who recognizes risk. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, you've expanded your opportunities.
And these are people, when you're in front of them, they think opportunities and big investments for a living. That's why they made their wealth. And if you just limit them to pure philanthropy, you're actually not tapping into all the ways they can actually think about, because they're thinking about the economics of health in the community. They're stewards of the community that you serve. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's right. If you go to them and say, "Give me $5 million to support," or "I'd like you to consider a gift of $5 million to support, a new wing of the building." Okay. Maybe I can get my name on it.
Yeah, I do it all the time.
It all the time. Yeah, sure. You tell them about the $5 million venture that you'd like to get into to buy into pediatric behavioral health and the apps and things we just talked about. Really? Tell me more, because now they're in the game. They're under the curtain with you, and that's what these type of investors want to be.
Is there? Do you see? Sorry, I'm geeking
out.
No,
please, by all means.
Do you see the profession? So if young professionals are getting into this, are they learning this, or are they still kind of this old genre?
It's old school. Definitely old school. And I think that there are some really strong foundation leaders who now recognize their seat at the table is changing significantly and have to adapt to that. And I think we'll slowly see that through. My plan has always been 5 years to foundationally, quote unquote, foundationally build the foundation, to redesign the investment into the foundation in typical, stereotype kind of foundations. But that reimagine is the one that is going to drive our success. It's going to drive us from being a rounding error or a cost center or something that is just sitting at the side of the table to one that's going to be at the center of the table, where all of a sudden you're getting a call from your chief innovation officer or, "Skip, I have an idea." I can't tell you when that started to happen. We were going into MA plans and insurance plans. What can the foundation or what can we do to do this? That's when you start feeling maybe.
When they're like, before we make any decision, we got to talk to these guys first.
Exactly.
Right. That's how powerful they are.
And it happens at higher ed in a more traditional way, because the philanthropy is the center of this.
It's such an engine. Yeah.
But in healthcare too.
Yeah. So what are some of the benefits you feel of working within a system? I mean, you've got 18 hospitals that are part of a system.
And you're the largest employer in a
large employer. I think it's almost like something we used to work with used to call one of our local hospitals. If you work there as the largest employer in town, it's a blue chip. When I make a phone call, often representing this organization, I could probably get a meeting.
Yeah, people pick up the phone when I call.
Yeah. What would you say some of the pros are working within a health system for philanthropy? Maybe what some of the negatives could be.
Yeah, no, certainly there's a lot of pros to it. INTEGRIS and Lee Health and Dartmouth. The name is in the community. The name is in Oklahoma's case, in the region, in the area. It certainly opens up doors. Healthcare organizations that get that large are always viewed as for-profit, and don't really need my support. Why does my $100,000 matter in a $3 billion organization? You hear that all the time. Whereas in small cottage hospitals, you can see the impact a lot more closely.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly break that down into all philanthropy is local. So each one of the hospitals, we have ways of supporting the community. We're only raising money for the community. We're not raising money for the big mothership or whatever the large healthcare hospital is.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just tremendous benefit to being part of this. But you have to engage your leadership. You have to engage them to understand what you're trying to do. That's when it can turn into a negative. Because if a potential, and I'll just use the typical donor here, not an investor, donor here calls up and goes, well, I know the chief nursing officer, the chief medical officer, whatever it is, and the chief medical officer goes, well, I'm not really that involved in the foundation. That sends a very significant message. Now, they can still really talk about the positiveness of what that investment might be. But that really can, because these organizations sometimes can be too large. And it's our job to make sure that we don't siloed everything, where the foundation is just viewed as there's a foundation. I thought it was just kind of this huge
exactly
system.
Yeah, if that chief of nursing someone said, "Oh, that foundation does so much for him."
Yeah,
I don't know all your questions, but you should talk to him. That would flip the entire message.
Absolutely.
When you were talking earlier around the investor and the role the foundation plays, you said, what keeps the CEO up at night? When you put your hat on, how important is it for you to actually empathize to build that relationship? Because you work in different worlds, but understanding what they're trying to do.
It's absolutely, it's a great question. It's absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Because that CEO will not understand your world if you're not willing to understand his or her world. And I think that once you begin to understand what that world looks like for that CEO and the competing advocacies every day that come after that CEO, the external factors of risk, of population health, of policies, state, national policies, that drives healthcare. If you don't understand that, you're never going to feel like aligned with the CEO where they feel trusted to you and vice versa.
What I really like about that, Skip, is it's a proactive posture that the foundation has. In my experience, it's often been more reactive. Like, we need to figure out ways to get our CEO more engaged with what we're doing.
Not the other way around.
So they understand more about what the foundation's role and responsibilities are, engaged, obviously, with investors and donors, but for them to learn. But I like your take on that, which is that you flip it and say, you need to understand a bit more of their role. And then it allows you to be able to find out where you can be of greater assistance.
And CEO sitting there going, like, Skip, I love you, but you got your staff, but I got 1,800 beds to think about.
Exactly.
So all of a sudden, he's like, if you go, no, I got it. You got 1,800 beds to think about. My job is to help you here, here, and here. Does that work for you? Yeah. Then it's a whole different relationship.
But we've you're spot on. We've been our own worst enemy, though, in healthcare philanthropy. We have not been transparent. We have not been driven by our metrics, by our KPIs. We've kind of said, well, I think, you kind of put the thumb up to the wind. And CEOs of healthcare systems, that drives them. I mean, it's always amazing to me when I came into healthcare philanthropy, a patient walks in the door of any hospital, they're automatically measured. Whether it's they're walking in the door, they're talking to somebody, everything gets measured. And there's certain standard of measurements, the 80% rule. Healthcare philanthropy, there's very little measurement. Jim, when we worked in one of the CHI places, I was just shocked that there was absolutely no measurement of how we were doing. So when you go to the CEO, you're kind of doing finger puppets and hoping they believe you, because there were no numbers that we were reporting up that were consistent and transparent. That's beginning to change. We now see that, but it's a slow change because sometimes you don't want to show the lack of success.
You hit on something very big. In philanthropy, you can hide behind the veil of goodness.
Yeah.
Which is like, no, we don't talk about that because this is safe philanthropy and it's too good. And we don't talk about metrics and stuff. And you can, it's a cultural norm for a lot of organizations and development people to hide behind that for as long as they can. And it always pays out in the end.
Right.
But you can do 3 years there pretty safe.
Absolutely.
And it's not okay. You shouldn't be doing that.
And we wonder why we struggle with being at the table.
Yeah, because you're a mythical creature that doesn't produce. And I can't talk to you about it because then I'm a bad guy.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. The unicorns the unicorn's at the end of the table, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist. But and that's where foundations have been. And that really has to be a change in the work that that Cause and Solution and others are doing is essential to that. I call it the back office. That's not fair because they really drive our success.
Yeah.
When we can now report consistent, transparent, forward-looking metrics that say, this is where we're going to be 6, 12, 18 months from now. All of a sudden, the CEO, the CFO, the COO, they're going to stand up and go, oh, that's the type of revenue streams we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's the type of opportunities. Never mind the reimagine piece, which is a little bit down here. That's the piece they want to hear. And all of a sudden, they have trust and transparency that you're willing to accept the ups and the downs.
Yeah. And when they can look at you and say, you're telling me 18 months from now, that's the number you're going to hit with a 95% or 80% or whatever the confidence, I need to start talking to you about some stuff because now I have low risk opportunities here that I can be partnered in.
Yeah. And I thank you for the shout out for Cause and Solution. I think in some ways, one of the things that we try to do based on our experiences, the same thing you're doing with your CEOs. We try to empathize with what it's like to be a chief development officer running either your own charity locally or your cause-based charity locally or a health system.
Yeah, you're a major system.
Or a university or college. Couple kind of go in a different direction a little bit. We always talk about what good looks like. What do you think good looks like in terms of staff that in a development office?
If I could, particularly because you're trying to hire people that can have investor dialogues.
Exactly.
Which is different than old school philanthropy.
So, we're hiring a bunch of major gift officers, a bunch of whole. And it's difficult to
You might get a lot of phone calls after this, too.
Yeah, please do.
It's tough to find folks who think in those terms. And part of that's been the fault of the healthcare provider. It's just not INTEGRIS. It's been other places. We tend to look for folks to grow, and I do look for folks to grow. But folks who have that kind of mentality that recognizes that it just doesn't sit into one piece. It is a much larger piece, much larger picture. And that they're willing to expand and innovate with it. So when I look at major gift officers or potential major gift officers, I really look at that inside of them. Quite frankly, their past success means something, but it's not critical to me because I want them to grow within a new way of thinking of philanthropy.
Interesting.
And you see very seasoned professionals who have that desire to learn and to be part of something different. But you also see that kind of, this is the way it works. This is the way we go, and so forth. And I think that of course, folks who have the ability to want to have goals, to want to understand what their success or lack thereof looks like, who want to believe that I'm willing to invest in them, not just hiring them, but to invest in them, invest in their career. I want folks who understand that when I create major gift roles, that I'm not creating roles that the only way you're going to move up is to move out. So I'm looking at creating a strata of roles for major gift officers. Not everybody wants to be the head of the foundation or the head of development. Or
Let me be a great major gift officer
be a tremendous major gift officer. And what happens is that if you don't create those pathways, they're going to leave.
Yep.
And all of that, what goes with them, leaves as well. That is tremendously
hurtful. Memory.
That like 18 months is the average turnover for people in any kind of leadership in this work.
That has to change.
You lose 3+ years plus the money.
Yep, exactly.
And turnover, and it's brutal on the system.
And we're now starting to pay major gift officers and significant fundraisers. We're starting to. They're not at the curve yet, put it that way, but we're starting to get there. And now we have to think of career paths within the organization. My organization is large enough where we can do that, but we have to think about their future and how we keep them engaged. And that's another step within this because we're growing. We're not just the gala people. We're not just the events people on the side anymore, the golf tournament. We're a professional organization, and we demand professional standards. We demand professional approach. We demand strategy. And we've never demanded that in the past. It's always kind of been, please, sir, may I have another? And it really we have to think differently about that.
Yeah. And that's why we were excited to have you on our podcast because I think you're thinking outside the traditional model there. I want to ask you a quick question, too, as we kind of start to wrap up a little bit of the conversation, was something you touched on having to do with the kind of the KPIs. And I think that in my experience within higher ed, another kind of comparison contrast thing, is they're used to the KPIs. They're used to being given basically, here's a pool of individuals I need you to visit with, connect with, and then you're used to entering that back into some type of system, saying, here's what I did. They're used to that kind of tracking. And I think it's because there's a culture of the whole organization doing that kind of work. The development team's just tracking what they've been able to get done. I don't see that as much in healthcare. It's there, but not as much. And it's almost as if, I've got to go out and I've got to make the call, ask, and visit. I don't have time to enter that type of information into the system. Do you see that kind of thing within healthcare too that's different than higher ed?
In higher ed, you have alumni. And you become an alumni the day you enter and register at the school. So they already have a record of you as an alumni the day you enter the school. You become part of their record, and you become part of the alumni record. So you have organizationally already created the database that has been growing over how many years, generations you've been around. So you've got that organization in place. Now they move around and shift around and so forth, but you can update that. In healthcare, it's not the same way. If someone raises their hand to buy an auction item for $100,000, are they a donor or are they buying something? And oftentimes, we don't ask that question.
Yeah.
If you ask somebody to become part of the auxiliary and they pay $100 to become part, is that their donation, that membership donation?
Mm-hmm.
It's very different in healthcare, and hence we kind of lose track of that. Higher ed doesn't suffer from that because they know their alumni body.
Yeah.
And their machines are set up, Blackbaud or Salesforce, whatever it is set up to deal with that.
Yeah.
Healthcare, it's very, very different.
So it's so there's an opportunity to get lost in the transactional stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Without understanding, we go back to the why.
Yeah. So even if you capture the transaction, you don't know the relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're starting 2 moves away. Universities, it's 1 move. You're here, you're alone.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, well, are they really given to us, or was it because they wanted the free trip to, Jamaica?
How many acquisition studies did I do in higher ed?
Yeah.
To acquire.
Yeah, you didn't have to.
I think we did. I think I did one that we had because we kind of lost track of a certain part of our alumni base. One.
Yeah.
How many acquisition things do we do all the time in healthcare?
Yeah.
Thousands.
Exactly.
Yeah, thousands.
It's very different.
Yeah, in terms of numbers.
Numbers,
not just dollars, but numbers. Yeah, dollars.
Dollars. It's not worth the investment. Quite frankly,
it's a long-term return on some of that. So, this has gone by so quick, but if people want to learn more about the foundation, how would they get a hold of you, the foundation? Follow-up questions, interest in future opportunities.
Sure.
Get a job.
Sure.
Well, for everybody.
Anytime folks want to reach out and just chat. Like I said, we're trying to change changes. It's going to take time, and I'm not necessarily going to be around for those changes. But if I can put in place some of these new ideas and new thinking about philanthropy and investment and a philanthropic investor.
My gosh, there's something you just said. I think it's fantastic, Skip. And I think often we don't think about this in our roles in development, no matter how long we're there. I think what we don't think about as often as we should is legacy.
Mm-hmm.
What's my legacy going to be within this organization? Sometimes you can come on board the ship and you can just help get it into port or out of port. But if you can give the people on board a whole new experience of something, you've left a legacy.
Yeah, it's going to be hard for them to do anything differently.
Exactly.
But the power we have of legacy, if you have 10 to 15 of the biggest community stewards that expect the kind of relationship and dialogue that you've put on the table, the next person's going to be like, well, I guess I got to have the
setting the bar.
Have a conversation.
You're setting the
no
bar.
matter what they do internally.
Yeah.
Well, and I think as we think of legacy, as we think about those relations, I think that number one, healthcare is going through a great deal of M&A right now, and it's going to continue to go through it as we continue to contract into. Some have said that over the next 20, 25 years, there's going to be 25 healthcare systems that will be the 95% of the dominant players.
Yeah.
That's possible, and so there's always a loss when that happens. And the legacies that we create and the relationships off of those legacies that we create can really help mitigate the loss that the community feels on that. We have to be reticent of this all the time because it is, as we see with some of the larger acquisitions that we've been part of, so much is lost so quickly. And if the foundation isn't on top of that, it's to some extent, it's a little bit feels like game over.
Yeah. I hear you.
Is there, I'll wrap this up here a little bit. We always give people any last words of wisdom or thing you want to part? You talked about so much today, but if someone coming into the field or as you're casting what you hope philanthropy brings in the future.
Well, first of all, if you're getting into it, it's a great place to get into.
Yeah,
I think
it's great.
You will find it very worthwhile and enjoyable, regardless of the level of philanthropy. We've only talked higher ed and healthcare, but the work that's being done at these small NGOs in every community, the food banks, the United Way and so forth, those are to where, if you want to talk about doing God's work, those are the folks who are out there doing the really hard work.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly fulfilling. So any way you get into philanthropy, it is just a tremendous way to feel connected to the community and connected to things that really are important to those who are underserved, forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly know about those. It's as good as it gets. So I'm just, like I said, very, very fortunate to be part of this.
Thank you. Jim, any last words as we
No, I just want
out?
to thank you, Skip, for being on the podcast, for sharing your experiences, your insights, your wisdom. I've known Skip for quite some time, tremendously professional in this industry, well known. The organizations you've worked with, very impressive. And I think that there's a lot for people to learn from this, and hopefully you get some people reaching out to learn more from you. So I want to say thank you very much on behalf of
Thank you, sir.
moving fundraising forward. And as always, for our viewers, our listeners, if you've got questions, and
There are no bad questions here. Bring them all.
there are no bad questions.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you
great
very
vision
much.
casting
Appreciate it.
today.
Thank
It was
you.
great.
Appreciate it.
All righty.
For more information or to send your questions and suggestions, please email us at info@movingfundraisingforward.com. This podcast is brought to you by Cause and Solution Inc. and Peak Coaching and Training Solutions. And as always, thank you for listening.